so much for joining us tonight. I'm Allison Gulick.
I'm Elliot, Keeley.
And we're going to give you a curatorial talk about the exhibition in the gallery, Waxcast, Creations by Earl Jones.
Yeah.
Okay. So first we want to thank all of Earl's family and friends who spoke with us, his sister who allowed us access to his studio, and many of the items that are in the gallery. And then this is a list of all the folks that did interviews with us. Some of them also lent work to the show. Jason Charney, who was our audio engineer on all the interviews that we did, and the William G. Baker Jr. Memorial Fund, who is the creator of the Baker Artist Portfolios. And then, of course, all of our friends here at the BJC who had to deal with us being stressed out. So a little bit about the project background and our initial ideas.
I first met Earl here at the Jewelry Center in 2019 when I moved here to start my job as a studio manager. At that time, Earl had taken a couple of classes with us to learn about photography, to learn about our studio, and he came pretty regularly. He used the studio. He had a couple lockers here. He made a lot of his production work here, and we talked a lot about it in those, first few months that I got to know him. And then in 2020, he had another major health issue. We didn't hear from him for a long time, and then he started to reach back out to me because he wanted help consolidating, and I think we just connected on his shop and talking shop and talking about making things, and that's where we kind of connected. And so I started helping him really regularly after that to sift through multiple studio spaces that he had and had kept over the years. And I started to quickly realize that he had a really good and not super organized personal record of his own life. Like, I'm sure a lot of us do, but I think it's pretty rare that he went and saved so much ephemera that was really fascinating later on. And I wish that I had had the opportunity to talk to him about it. But through this, process of consolidation, we became a little bit more close. I started to think of him more as like a mentor to me, and I definitely have learned a lot in my personal practice. Some of the techniques that he puts forth in his own work to make a lot of stuff have become influential to me. So,
right. And as Elliot was helping with that, we were also in the process of doing a round of exhibition proposals for the gallery space. So one day Elliot came in and said to me, we've been going through all this stuff at Earl's studio. I really didn't know, he had done so much. And with my background in curating, I was like, well, why don't we do a retrospective? And Elliot talked to Earl about it, and he was very excited about it. Immediately started thinking of people that he wanted to contact and get pieces from. And so we put in a proposal to the exhibitions committee that got accepted and started the journey. And these are some pictures that Elliot took in Earl's studio, and you can see Earl's actually in the background on the one picture. But just to give you a sense of sort of a very busy artist studio. If you've ever been in an artist studio, they're very full of things. So once we collected all these items and brought them here to the studio, we started doing research. We wanted to kind of understand what is the breadth of Earl's career. And I will say this PowerPoint has a lot of slides that are not always necessarily in line with the heading, but there was just so much content that I wanted to show everyone. So please feel free to ask questions as we're going through, but there's a lot of stuff that we weren't able to show in the gallery, so I want to try and show as much of that content here as we could. Yeah?
I have a question. So I'm curious, I love these little personoid sculptures that he's done. They're some of my favorite works of his. And I'm wondering, and I apologize if you're getting to this later in your presentation, but I'm really curious as to his process of sourcing the, discarded items that he uses for these sculptures.
So, yeah, of course. So Earl graduated high school here in Baltimore, Edmondson High School, and then he started working in construction. So he was doing building here in Baltimore and then also in DC. And I think a lot of the sourcing started on job sites. So where something was getting renovated and torn out. If you've ever been on a job site, there's a lot of stuff that just gets kind of tossed around until the final cleanup. And so I think he was doing a lot of sourcing from his jobs.
I think that's pretty obvious from it's like plumbing, there's scrap hardware, and the methods are like he's brazing them together with bronze, and it's kind of like there's like a quickness and immediacy to it. And I think we found that he probably started making this style of work during it was like a competition or something gathering weekend at Towson. And then he kind of like continued this practice, and so he never sought education after high school, but he took classes at like a degree seeking, but he took classes at community college in Towson and some other places. But I think it was primarily from like working construction. We had one interview that said he built was a project manager building like multiple apartment complexes in the DC area. And when I would drive around with him, he would point out like, I did their bathroom, I refinished their basement, I did their roof. And he was kind of indispensable with knowledge of different types.
Right. So and I think like this is what we call like the early work, but so he was part of this show at the BMA. They used to do like biennial shows, and he won a prize of $100 for the sculpture component of the show. And I think I looked it up, and that's like maybe $750 in today's money case. But thinking like he graduated probably like in '69, so he's still very young when he's having this sort of like initial success, which is really exciting. And so I think you can see here in this image that the Bicycle Man doesn't have the Creations by Earl Jones sign, and then in this next one he does, and that's the piece that's in the gallery. And like all of these newspaper articles are things that Earl saved. So in addition to the found object pieces, he was also doing fountains. There's a fountain in the gallery, obviously. I think this might have been his family home on the left.
Yeah,
we're not 100%
we never got a
sure,
confirmation on that. We don't have confirmation on that yet. But.
You can see it's sort of a similar style to what is in the other picture. So this is sort of showing you some more of his sculpture work, and then also this is, we think, 207 Saratoga, which is where his casting business was. If y'all are familiar where MAP is now, it was on that same block. And
Maryland Art Place.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
And that's also where the Great Blacks and Wax Museum was originally. It was on Saratoga. So one of the interviews we did was talking with Dr. Joanne Martin, one of the co-founders, and she sort of gave us a little vignette of what Saratoga Street was like in the 80s. it was sort of a community of young Black creatives, many of them struggling, but sort of like leaning on each other. There was somebody that was doing like graphic design and signs, and so everybody would go to them to have their signs made. And it was just really unique to hear, like, from her point of view, like what the street was like during that time. And around this time, we think Earl started the casting component of his business.
Yeah, he was at one point asked to make some jewelry. This is in his words, his story. He was asked to make a jewelry display for a local gallery, and it turned into like, he's like, I could probably figure out how to make jewelry. And then, and then I think he discovered lost wax casting through a class somewhere, and then he kind of ran with it. He thought that it was like the most efficient, easiest way to make the most money. I think was his goal, was to like make money doing something creative. I don't think he ever wanted to be under somebody else's thumb. He wanted to be his own boss all the time. So
so here are some photos of his like early space at Waxcast. For those that don't know, the bottom right is the vacuum pump for sealing work and plaster. The cylindrical machine you can see in all three of the other photos is a wax pot where he's doing this like hot liquid wax that you inject into molds. And I just love seeing these photos of like his early working space.
yeah, I think it's important to note, like you can see in his hands here, if you can see my cursor in the top right image, he's working with single injection molds, just as a technical thing. It goes on later. He develops and patents a process that uses multiple patterns in one mold, and you can see that in the gallery. But for a long time, and this is like still an industry standard, is a single injection mold. So you inject one object, and then you wait for it to cool, and then you can demold it, and then sprue it and cast it. So I'll explain we'll talk a little bit more about the replicator later, but yeah.
So thinking about our curatorial approach, creating sort of a context and framework, we wanted to also be aware of like what was going on in the world during that time and what was going on like in Earl's world during that time. And so, the 1980s, the early 1980s, was a moment not like unlike our own, where things were sort of swinging conservative, and there was polarization happening, but there was also a rise in Black nationalism and the Million Man March on Washington, and a growing sort of Afrocentric consciousness that's also reflected in the arts community. So this is an example of a program that happened at Sun Gallery Goldsmiths in DC. And you can see here on the back sort of a list of the different artists that were talking. So Earl always spoke about wax design and sculpture. Eugene Green, who's an artist and was a friend of Earl's we got to interview as part of the exhibition, was talking about metal and surface techniques. Q.Q. Davis was a designer, and then Jamel Mims was doing filigree, and he was one of the co-owners of Sun Gallery Goldsmiths. So you can also see that there was sort of, during this time, a little bit of a community that was building up. Formally and informally, Black artists, especially in the DMV, were organizing to make sure that their work was being seen. So Jamel is here on the left, and Eugene on the right, and this is at Sun Gallery in DC, and they would have sort of these open house days where people could come in and learn.
Yeah, photos from the same roll that we have were, I think there's another shot from the roll on the next slide, but there were other jewelers that we got in touch with, certain people, and we were like, hey, look at these photos. Do you recognize any of these people? And they were like, yeah, that's Eugene Green, that's the hangman, like, here's his email, here's his phone number. So there was a little bit of word of mouth, like, discovering who these people were. Some of them are still alive. We kind of knew about Jamal. You know, he has a presence in the regional, like, jewelry field. And, placing that was kind of an interesting part of it.
Right.
And other people at these events were, like, families. We don't know if this, which is photographed with Earl talking to, this is another jeweler, Shukri, who's still a wholesale goldsmith in the area. We don't know if this was one of the Black Gold events, but we imagine, like, it's an open house of some kind. Artists are demonstrating, so we have to assume, like, this is a common thing that was happening a lot. So
Right.
That was interesting.
Yeah, and so as we interviewed people, they would say, well, oh, have you talked to so-and-so, or have you talked to so-and-so, and so we kind of were able to piece together a little bit of a network and hear from those different folks about, like, how they remember Earl, how they remember his work, and how they kind of remember the scene during that time. So there was definitely a group of guys that were sort of all learning casting together. They shared the process with one another. They actually went so far as to share molds with one another, which is really unique, I think, in today's age where everything is so competitive. But these gentlemen were sharing even as close as DC, and then again farther afield, people that they were meeting at shows and that kind of thing. They were knowledge sharing with one another. And then I think there was also some formal organizing as well. One of the artists we spoke to, a leather artist named Marvin Sin, told us about a group called the Vision Collective in DC that was a little bit more formalized, of pushing Black arts forward. So that was, we think that Black Gold, we know the Black Gold event was in 81. We're assuming that those open houses were having at around that time too. And so in 83 is where we see Earl and his then partner, Benita Johnson, do their opening reception of their gallery space here in Baltimore. And there's lots of great news coverage of the spot opening. And I think what's really unique to me is that they weren't using the space just as a gallery. They were also using it as a space for lectures, discussions, performances. And I think in the way that we contemporarily think about gallery spaces, like, that's really not unusual, right? You imagine multiple things happening. But I think in the early 80s, it was much more rare, and especially to have a young Black couple creating space for Black creatives in Baltimore, I think is something that is very unique. So you can see there's more. That's a photo of Benita at the spot, and another image of Earl. And then you can see down in the bottom, these are like advertisements that he had in the newspaper, and the one on the very bottom right, you can see the Waxcast, the grand opening, and then you can see above that, like, Grimaldis Gallery. So anyone that's, here in Baltimore knows Grimaldis, and so that kind of also helped us see what the landscape was like during the time that he was opening. Yeah.
At this point, is he working full time with
He-
the Waxcast Gallery, or
We
still doing
believe
construction?
so, doing predominantly like a mix of the gallery and then the casting business. But I'm not 100% certain if he'd given up.
I think that there's examples we have of him doing wholesale or mail order business for jewelry, advertising in different periodicals. But I think that came later. I think probably, like, he during this phase was probably focused on retail. Like, we saw products that he had kept, like stationery and posters and things like that, and was probably still doing some, like, construction and carpentry on the side, more part-time.
Okay.
So we're not exactly sure when the gallery closed. We know it was open 83 and I think into 84. We know he did like Afram one year when it was still down in the Inner Harbor. And he had like Marvin and some other artists there with him. But then kind of moving into the late 80s, early 90s, he was doing more and more sales and like markets and festivals. And you can see here they had the work described as cultural jewelry. We think that it's like maybe DC on the left and maybe Philly on the right. And during that time, he moved to Philadelphia in the early 90s. So we're not exactly sure when the gallery closed after 83, but we know that by the early 90s, he moved up to Philadelphia, and he lived with his artist, his girlfriend, who was also an artist, Ashake Jones, and her 2 kids. And that's when he started thinking about the replicator, but I also wanted to show that the examples of his cast work. So this was really the type of work that he was making during this period. We have some great examples of this in the exhibition, and if you look closely, you can see the repetition of certain things. Like, I think the cowrie shells on this Chihuahua earring, like they're about the same size, right, as these eyepiece ones.
Yeah, he's definitely if you go back a slide, he's definitely collaging elements like this. You can see this comb element with the doll, like it's
the same comb.
Yeah, so he
yeah.
definitely was like collaging these different like cultural symbols, adding a little bit of his own flair to them, but I think wanted them to be really recognizable to people and accessible to people. He talked about, he wanted people to see themselves in the work, and knew his customer really well. He wanted these to be for, Black people who wanted to buy jewelry that represented them. So, I think we got off track a little bit. But.
It's okay. So here is again some examples. There's Africa and the pyramid pieces. Those are like some of the molds that the group of guys shared amongst themselves, and Shukri even still sells those wholesale through his gold business. So it's very unique. Like when we did another talk with Lamar Gales, a scholar out of Chicago, and somebody noticed that like, hey, that's like exactly the same piece, right? And it's like, yeah, the guys were sharing these molds and teaching each other this technique. And I just think that's really unique and lovely. So some challenges that we faced during the exhibition is that last summer, Earl passed away unexpectedly. He was not in great health, but we weren't expecting that to happen. And so we had a full year left on planning the exhibition, and we hadn't started doing any conversations with him or videos or just having any more conversation than what Elliot and he were talking about when they were working together in the studio. And we felt now more than ever it was important to put on the exhibition, but we wanted to make sure that the content that we were sharing was as close to firsthand as possible. And so that's when we sort of shifted to this idea of doing interviews. And we started interviewing anyone that we could get contact information for, essentially. And kind of like we said, we connected with Rashida Mims. I'm pretty sure I stalked her on Facebook and was like, hey, will you talk to me? And she very graciously did. And then, was like, you need to talk to Eugene. You need to talk to Marvin. And so that's like our little circle, like kept growing and growing. And there's just so much great information in the interviews that we did with people. I think, we probably did 10 or 12 interviews, maybe more. So that was really great as far as like, again, helping us create the context of the time, also giving us more context about Earl, where he'd started, where he was going. And so when he moved to Philly in the early 90s, he was living with Ashake and her 2 kids, and he built a shed in her backyard. You can see him working on it there. I saw it when I went up to Philly to borrow work. It's still there in her yard. It was not heated, and he was in there, she said, at like 4 or 5 in the morning and would just work. And between the shed and her basement is where the replicator really started coming into formation.
Yeah, I think we found a voice memo from Earl pretty late, so we couldn't include it in exhibition materials, but it was a recording that he did, like a dream journal he was at like a trade show.
In his dream,
and he was dreaming about a machine. Like, I think if there are non-jewelry people in the room, there's a lot of access in places like Philadelphia at this time, and still in the late 80s, early 90s, to jewelry industry, and not just small shops, but factories that are putting out a lot of work. And because of that, like, he's situated in the mid-Atlantic region near Providence, in Philly. He's in the American jewelry industry. So I think he talked about knowing people that are still in the industry, and I think he met them at trade shows. And I think it was just this sort of, he was attending them because he wanted to know more. And he had this idea, and I think he needed people to help make it possible. Like, he needed contexts, people that he could rely on.
Right. And during the interviews, like, something that came up over and over again was like his sort of entrepreneurial spirit and sort of his business acumen. Like, many of the artists were like, yeah, Earl was like kind of ahead of us, and like he would give us business advice, and he would tell us like what kind of machines we needed to do to actually like do big production. And like Marvin the leather worker was like, you know, he told me that I should get like this design made in metal, and then I could press it into the leather, and I wouldn't have to carve each piece individually by hand. So he really was always thinking about making the process easier, making it more effective. And the replicator really makes sense in that context of like, you're making one wax at a time till you can fill up a screw tree and cast. Well, why don't you make 20 at a time? And so that's when he created the replicator. And then instead of going to like jewelry sales, selling his own work, he moved into that manufacturing space. And you can see the replicator, which is in the gallery, but you can also see here, you know, what he's got in his hand is, I think, actually the mold that we have in the gallery. I think it's
a master.
Yeah,
it's a tool of jewelry used to make more molds. So it's the master to make another mold, and he's showing someone from MJSA how his machine works. And yeah, that one's for chain links.
Yeah. So each of those little pieces would, you know, be taken off and then casted in metal and then taken off and
so the pedestal we have in the gallery with the replicator on it, we put out some of the materials. So this that's on top of the machine in the gallery is like his booth advertisement. We printed one of those out. There's a mold. This is a wax pot or wax injector that he's attached to the machine. So this feeds molten wax into the machine, and the machine does the controlled heating, controlled pressure, controlled injection rate, all of it is very precise, and you get a perfect injection.
Was he thinking that this was going to be his business? He was going to he was going to market and make these?
Yeah, I think
I guess.
he wanted to, Rio Grande, the big jewelry business was expanding at this time. He said that they were interested in buying this design so that they could remanufacture it. I think he invented it in 1996 or 97 and then applied for the patent and had a patent by 1999.
More looking to license it out and not do it.
He wanted to license it to other companies so that they could remanufacture. I think that was like the big goal. And I mean, he sold a few of these prototype units or other units to different people. Like there's one that exists in Miami, he told me, and there's we heard from someone that may have one in Maryland still. So
Companies or
Jewelers.
Those two examples that I mentioned are to jewelers specifically. So I think that the goal with this machine, and there was another version that was larger, but this specific one that's in this booth would be for like a small shop. Someone maybe like Earl, who's a sole proprietor, who is producing things themselves with like a couple of employees. And you have like a big product that you do wholesale. You can fulfill a wholesale order really quickly, which if that's the name of the game, like you have to be able to fill the wholesale order very quickly. So I think that was the goal for this kind of product.
And you can see here, like he won an award, which his sister still has at the International Black Buyers and Manufacturers Conference. And then on the bottom piece, that row on the top of green, that's waxes. That will be cast. So you can see like the sheer number that he was producing to be made.
Yeah, he said, well, the tagline on that little card in the gallery says something like,
Your new employee,
like, do you need 1,000 more waxes a day? And I mean, yeah, you look at that top shelf, there may be 1,000 pieces of jewelry in wax getting ready to be invested and cast, like gone through that whole process. So, the volume wax.
right?
No, I don't think that's the shed, but I'm not sure exactly where that was. If that's at the Waxcast shop or.
Not sure.
Yeah.
Not sure.
But so he moved back to Baltimore in the early 2000s and unfortunately started having some major health problems. And
he had major surgery.
Yeah, a number of major surgeries.
And he that kind of put a halt on the business. He couldn't travel to go to shows, to advertise, get in front of potential investors or whoever, potential buyers. And casting is very messy. It's very dirty. It's very physical. So he couldn't do any of that stuff anymore. So he had to shift his focus to another process. He always said that his body just had trouble keeping up with his brain. Like his brain was always going. And I think he struggled with that because he always wanted to make a lot of stuff. And he eventually got there, but it was a major hurdle.
Right. And so he started, again, thinking about efficiency and production. He started developing these certain shapes that he was using. And he heard about CNC machine, and he decided that he wanted one. And we have this great audio of his friend Yael saying, I want to make this machine. I want to get this machine. It costs $10,000. Yeah, I'm going to make my own. And he made his own CNC machine. And that's before there was a makerspace in every major city.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, this is in the early 2000s. There's not a single consumer CNC product on the market, probably. So he had to buy everything piecemeal or buy it from a manufacturer for $10,000 or more So he started buying servo motors, and he taught himself how to use Corel Draw, and he, figured it out on his own.
Right.
And I think that just speaks to, he was recovering during this time, so he had a lot of time on his hands, but man, this guy was determined to, not let that get in his way. So these designs they all have his hand on them. He hammers each one individually, paints the fire patina on each one individually, but by and large, they're cut out by a machine.
Yeah.
And they don't really, I think it's unique because they don't necessarily give that impression.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hammering really helps with that, given that handmade feel. And you can see kind of how each pair really is like set together. They're like not identical necessarily, but the colors are very similar. And we learned that is incredibly difficult to do.
I think it just requires a really specific understanding of
Right.
the material.
Yeah.
It exhibits like a nuanced knowledge
Right.
of copper.
Right.
And is this heat patinas that we're seeing?
Yeah, this is heat patina. Notoriously difficult to not only preserve but have it, it always looks best when it's wet, after you quench it. So he found this great lacquer that's really specific.
Didn't you say there are 4 coats of it on every?
Yeah, so he was really proud of the whole process. So yeah, I think they're they have that unique aspect.
Yeah. And so this is what he started taking to shows, and he was doing really well with these. He was selling them locally at the BMA shop in their store. He also had wholesalers buying them throughout the country. I know he had a great, Mary mentioned multiple times, he had a great connection with somebody out in Sedona. I mean, if you think about sort of deserts and, of course this would be doing great,
Yeah, so he did shows all over the country, but he also started doing ACC, the American Craft Council Conference, and he was also doing the Smithsonian show. I think he did a couple times. So that gets you out in front of a different wholesale buying audience that has a greater appreciation for the craft and the process, I think, than maybe a festival goer. So he definitely graduated and was doing these big wholesale clients.
Yeah. And in 2020, the Society of North American Goldsmiths gave him a lifetime achievement sort of award, and that's what you see here. Joyce was also getting an award that year, and they knew each other from coming up in Baltimore. And then thinking about the exhibition a little bit more specifically, we have a very small gallery space, and so much of Earl's life and work that we wanted to share. And so we sort of approached it by dividing it into different sections. The early work, the replicator, the casting work, kind of the business and gallery aspect of things, plus the later production work. And we wanted to show as much as we could while also maintaining a digestible narrative for visitors. I mean, I would love for everyone to see all these images, and this is not even half of what we have, So we wanted to show his work, but then also figure out ways to kind of bring him into the show a bit more. And I think that the images do a really nice job of that. It's mostly the gallery.
Oh yeah, special thanks to Ian Murphy for making some fresh display cases
Right.
for us that I think, show off the work really nicely.
Yeah.
Is that Mary McCabe wearing his work on the cover there?
No, it was just from his personal collection of magazines that he had advertisements in.
Yeah.
There were some. Halle Berry has worn his earrings in a movie.
We haven't found proof yet, but the big papyrus leaf necklace is told to us to have been worn by Oprah during her time as a newscaster here in Baltimore. She was here like 83 to 86, which overlaps with his gallery time.
And
So-
also Judith Jameson, who passed away last year. I mean, like every headshot she ever did, she's wearing a pair of Chihuahua Earl earrings. So.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
then-
he had some I think some clients that really liked to wear his work. So
Yeah. And then we did some public programs and community engagement with this show. So we bought a die for our hydraulic press and found a shape that felt similar to some of the shapes that Earl used, and we had a free community workshop where folks could come in and try their hand at doing the fire painting. And this is the results we got. I think our metal was significantly thicker than what he used, I think, or like somewhat. But there you can see that you get there's a certain sort of the oil spill colors that come up, but you can see that those pieces do not look the same. Those pieces don't look like his pieces. But it's always really great for us to be able to have folks in the studio who haven't made jewelry before, and to be able to share sort of the exhibition with them and Earl's process was really nice. And then we have some time for question and answer, and these are just two of my favorites, so I had to stick them in.
vacation,
Right.
yeah.
Does anybody have questions about anything you saw in the slideshow or in the exhibition? Not everybody at once. Yeah, Mary.
I don't know if you're comfortable answering this, but what do you think Earl would think about the narrative that you've laid out? How did he see the kind of strand of? I know you didn't get to have those conversations, which is really tragic. But do you have a sense from your conversations with him how he saw this kind of process of different parts of his career?
I mean, I just like to tell myself that he would have liked it. That he would have appreciated the detail that we paid attention to, and sort of acknowledging these different chapters in his career, right? But you spent a lot more time with him.
I mean, I know, he told me he wanted to make some new work for the exhibition. He wanted my help to be a fabricator for him and help him see through some ideas that he maybe never got to, that he had, Yeah, I think for me it's wrapped up a little bit in there's a personal grief to it. So, you'll never be able to access that part of you never know what someone would think. And I certainly hope he would be proud.
Right. But I think, his sister and friends that came to the show, I think, really appreciated it. Marvin drove up from North Carolina,
Yeah. And I think it's something that we couldn't have done. I couldn't have done without Allison, because my inclination is to just let the work speak for itself. But I think Allison's much more of your inclination was to reach out to people, and we got as close to an interview with him, as I think we could have gotten by just interviewing his circle.
And we do have April Gray, who is the buyer at the BMA shop, did a recording with him a few weeks before he passed. And we have that. That's part of the audio. And you can really, it's interesting to listen to him talk about his work. He talked about just cutting and pasting, like that's how he thought about it, you know. And the fact that I think he was like even hammering in the place where he lived, you know, he wasn't doing a bunch of stuff, but he still had like a hammer, right, that he was using in that space. And you know, we have the tapes. I would love to listen to that too. And you know, this is also work that Elliot and I did on top of our regular BJC work. So there's still a ton of stuff that we haven't been able to go through and process. But yeah,
Is there still some of this stuff out there for sale?
I'm not sure.
She said it was like at galleries all over the
Right.
place.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have been meaning to like make a list of places that carried his work and reach out and see what they have.
He had backstock in his personal stash, you know, that just is. We haven't reached a. No one's reached a decision, and I don't think
Part
it's.
of his estate.
Yeah. So, there's certain, like, lots of the stuff that we have belongs currently to his sister. We don't know exactly what her plans are for it at this time. Though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a
That
question?
was my question
Okay.
about what was going to happen. So all these archival materials
Right.
that you found and a rich body of work, and you don't know yet the estate hasn't made a decision.
Yeah. I mean, we'd like to. I don't know for sure, but we'd like to at least make the research that we've done and the images, we'd like to have that be in a publicly accessible archive so that more people can continue to do scholarship on his work and, you know, place him within larger circles of craftspeople. But yeah, that's kind of like the next step for us to figure out is how we're going to do that. And also, like, how can we make sure that this show like continues on? So like we've been in contact at least with the Baltimore Museum of Industry about potentially showing the replicator, and they have like a small little streetscape that has like
Yeah, their Decker Gallery. If anyone has ever been to the Museum of Industry, it's like
Yeah.
the big, beautiful view of the harbor gallery
Yeah.
that has storefronts. So, yeah, we'd love to have it like a part of a like this is a working artist studio.
right.
We just don't have the archival capabilities, I think, to like store this stuff long term. But I think Earl was incredibly hardworking. There's a lot of his work out there. I would love to have it be recognized or a part of some historical repository of some kind, you
Yeah.
know, that someone could access and be inspired by. That would be my hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mercury?
So through, like your guys' digging that you did into his life to make this show, I'm wondering if there's anything that you haven't yet shared in the presentation that like surprised you to discover about Earl and his life that you didn't already know.
I don't know, not really for me. I think digging and like being able to look at these different pictures, like, you know, we have vacation pictures from a couple of different eras of his life, and I think I don't know, I feel like I'm generally happiest on vacation, and so like getting to see him in sort of like this relaxed and natural state, like, you know, digging through somebody's life, essentially like seeing these different facets of him, I think that for me was like maybe not unexpected, but like there's sort of like these periods, right, that you kind of get a sense of, I don't know, the edges of chapters in his life, you know, which you don't really think about like when you're living life, but when you're looking back, you think, oh, like that, those were my crazy 20s or whatever, you know, but like you see like within his career, like milestones that he had, the replicator, I think, being a huge one, you know, like insanely amazing, and like, you know, also just hearing people who knew him talk about him and like how he was always there to build out something. He went down to North Carolina and helped Marvin build out his studio when he moved there from DC. When Paul Coates started his printing business, he built him tables that Paul was still using, you know. When there was like an issue with one of the printing machines and like the glue applicator, like Earl was there and like, you know, fixed it in like 5 minutes, you know.
Yeah,
like,
he's definitely like a mechanic. And for me, I mean, for my part, seeing like evidence of a train of thought or like a style of thinking or approaching a problem, I've been able to see like lots of different ingenuity or examples of ingenuity or examples of just his like, Earl was he was opinionated. He, you know, liked things a certain way, and he was a perfectionist to a very high degree. And I see that in like little decisions that he made to like make a shop tool, or, you know, one that I discovered during the installation and preparation for the exhibition was preparing the fountain, which was loaned to us by Paul Coates. It hadn't worked for a long time, so I had, through going through his studio, a couple of pumps that I knew he had used, and I was determined to figure it out, so I cleaned it up, and he had like invented a bulkhead for the fountain so that it functioned and looked exactly the way that he wanted. So it was like based on hardware store parts, and he like chopped and screwed it together to make it work in this really specific way. And I just thought, I mean, when I discovered that, I think sometimes I can't help it. I probably showed everybody who was here that day. I was like, look at this thing. Like, isn't this such an interesting way to think about something? He used jewelry rubber to solve this problem with like keeping the fountain sealed. So yeah, I thought there was always surprises like that going through his studio. I don't know. I think,
I mean, it's also just this sheer amount of stuff that he kept, you know,
Yeah.
like he kept every mold. Like, so for that order sheet, the colorful one that's on the wall, like we found every one of those molds. And, you know, that to me is just like kind of amazing, like that he would keep all of that stuff, right?
yeah. The molds, I think, were, yeah, there's so much innovation within his own mold making practice that, you know, it's kind of like really totally radically changed how I think about that process and that tool. So yeah, I think I want that to be a resource eventually. Like, I'd love to have a library of these molds for students to learn from or something like that. I don't know. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody, for coming. Yeah.